galaxy had not yet fallen silent, but it trembled beneath the weight of memory. Once, the Celestium Imperium had been a beacon among the stars, its banners reflected across nebulae like threads of gold woven through the cosmos. Now, its worlds flickered in and out of existence like fading candles. Ships drifted without purpose. Entire sectors lay in ruin, their once vibrant civilizations reduced to whispers in the void. There were those who remembered the Empire's glory with reverence, and others who spoke of it only in fear. But all of them, knowingly or not, echoed the same name: Valian Sargavran, the Eternal Sovereign, the one who could not die even when everything he fought to protect did. We gather here in these quiet embers of history, not merely to recount a legend, but to understand the weight of what was lost. And before we begin, I want you to know something truly. We are grateful to have you here, to share this moment with us. Your presence matters, your attention, your time. So before we begin the story, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? And what time is it there? Now let's get started. The stars around the throne world of Orion burned weakly, as though they too were exhausted by the centuries of war. On its surface, atop a citadel carved from obsidian and star-forged stone, Valian stood alone on a balcony overlooking the shattered city below. His armor, once a radiant mirror of celestial glory, had dulled. The engravings of victories long past were obscured by scratches and scorched marks, memorials of battles he could never forget. He did not lean on the railing. Immortality had denied him the privilege of weariness. But his eyes, the eyes of one who had lived far too long, carried the sorrow of 10,000 lifetimes. He watched the horizon, where the great spire of Ceranthis once rose, a monument to unity and hope. Now it was a broken husk, a collapsed skeleton of stone and metal. Fires still burned at its base, their smoke drifting upward like sighs from a dying world. Valian's breath was steady, though he had no need to breathe. His heartbeat was slow, though his heart no longer served the purpose it once did. Time had not touched him, but it had taken everything else. In the silence, he spoke, but not aloud. His thoughts stirred in the depths of his mind, where memories lay like dormant embers waiting to ignite. He remembered the rise, the triumphs, the countless worlds that had sworn allegiance not out of fear but admiration. He remembered the laughter of allies, the bond of warriors who believed in him more fiercely than they believed in themselves. He remembered her, Seraphine, the warmth of her presence, her hands guiding his, her voice tempering his ambition. For centuries, she had been his anchor, the one who saw not the emperor, but the man behind it. But even stars burn out. He blinked slowly, and the memory faded like a reflection disturbed by rippling water. The wind carried the distant sound of collapsing architecture. The city was still dying. It had been dying for a long time. The empire had been crumbling long before the first stone fell. Valian had seen the signs, shifts in loyalty, the subtle decay of morale, the doubt in once trusting eyes. He had known something precious was slipping from his grasp. Yet, for all his power, all his brilliance, all his centuries of experience, he could not stop it. The throne room behind him was vast and empty. The banners of great houses hung motionless. Once they had been symbols of unity. Now they resembled funerary cloth. Footsteps echoed faintly in the distance. Guards, attendants, scholars. Those few who remained. They whispered his name with reverence and guilt. None dared interrupt him. They knew that this was not a moment for counsel nor command. This was a moment of remembrance. He lifted his gaze to the sky. The stars here had once been bright, almost unbearably so. Now many were gone, snuffed out by wars he had not been able to prevent. Light extinguished before its time. And every time a star died, Valian felt it. Immortality was not merely survival. It was witnessing endless endings. A soft sound stirred behind him, wings metallic and whisper-like. Not wings of a creature, but constructs of polished silver and stardust energy. A figure approached, kneeling. It was Erind, the last of the Orion Seraphic Guard, once protectors of the palace and advisors of the crown. His form was tall and austere, but his kneeling posture held reverence rather than weakness. "My lord," Erind said, voice quiet, almost reverent. "The council gathers. They await your word for what comes next." What comes next? The words hovered in the air like frost. Once, Valian had known exactly what came next. Every step had been calculated, every action part of a greater vision. But now, there was no plan. There was only aftermath. And the burden of aftermath was heavier than any war. He did not turn. He did not speak immediately. When he finally answered, his voice was calm, almost gentle, like someone speaking to a child about a truth too painful to understand. "There will be no council," he said. Erin's head rose a fraction. "My lord?" "There is nothing left to govern," Valian continued. "Nothing left to rule. The empire is broken. The stars are beyond our reach. Our people are scattered. And those who remain..." His voice faded. He closed his eyes briefly. "They look to me for salvation. But all I have given them is ruin." Erin bowed his head, but did not protest. He too had seen the truth. To deny it would be to deny reality. But there was something else beneath Valian's words. A tremor of something deeper. Something that had been buried for centuries, but now surfaced. Unresolved, unfinished. A promise, a memory, a betrayal. The wind rose, lifting the tattered remains of a banner. The symbol upon it, a sun encircled by a ring, fluttered weakly, as though struggling to hold on to meaning. Valian reached out and caught it. His fingers brushed the worn fabric, and for a moment, the world dissolved. He saw Arcturus. He saw Seraphine. He saw the moment it all began to fracture. His heart did not beat faster. Immortality denied such responses. But something deeper stirred. The past was calling, and he could no longer ignore it. He released the banner and turned at last toward the interior of the citadel. "The time to remember has come," he murmured, and the world, as though listening, seemed to hold its breath. The corridors of the citadel stretched before him like veins of stone and starlight, winding back into the heart of history. Valian walked in silence, Erind following at a respectful distance. The torches along the walls flickered with pale blue flame, casting shifting shadows that seemed to move even when neither of them did. Each step echoed softly, as though the halls themselves remembered footsteps from long ago and answered in kind. The world outside still burned, but in these halls the past remained untouched. Here, memory lived. He stopped before a sealed archway. The door was carved from crystallized etherstone, translucent and gently pulsing with dormant energy. Within its depths lay silhouettes of moments frozen in suspended time. Valian raised his hand and placed his palm upon the cool surface. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the stone glowed softly, recognizing its master, and dissolved into drifting shards of light. Erind had never entered this chamber before, though he had sworn oaths to die protecting it. The chamber of founding lay ahead. once a sanctuary of unity, counsel, and purpose. Now, it was a mausoleum of memory. As Valian stepped inside, the lights brightened slowly, as if waking from a long slumber. And everywhere around them, carved into the walls and suspended in holographic relief, were images of the Empire's beginning. Armies marching beneath a banner that gleamed like rising dawn. Crowds gathering in celebration across newly joined worlds. Councils sharing vision instead of suspicion. It had been an age of ascendance, one built not on fear, but belief. Valian's steps carried him to the center, where a single circular dais awaited. When he touched its edge, the room responded, light flaring upward and forming the image of a memory he had not allowed himself to see in centuries. Seraphine. She appeared as she had then, standing beside him on the day the Celestium Imperium was truly born. Her hair was like the pale fire of a comet's tail, cascading in waves that shimmered even in darkness. Her eyes, deep and steady, held that rare balance of compassion and certainty, the gaze of someone who understood the cost of greatness and still believed in its pursuit. She stood at his right hand, as she always had, not as ornament, nor as queen, nor as soldier, but as conscience. She had been the first to see what he could become, and the first to fear what he might. Erin bowed his head, not out of duty, but respect. Even memory commanded reverence. "This was the day we bound the worlds of the Asterix belt," Erin murmured. Valian said nothing, but the flicker of memory was enough to carry him back. The Hall of Dawn had been filled with thousands, diplomats, soldiers, scholars, children, the future of 1,000 systems. They had looked upon Valian as more than a leader. They saw him as destiny made flesh. Yet even then, among the cheers and the swell of triumph, there had been one who did not celebrate. General Arcturus Vile stood near the base of the dais, his face calm but unreadable. He had worn no expression of doubt, no sign of rebellion, and yet something in his eyes had shimmered with unspoken thought. Arcturus had been there from the beginning, not as follower, but as brother. They had fought side by side in the wars of unification, shared laughter in the rare quiet moments, and bled through the same armor when the enemy threatened to break their lines. If Seraphine had been Valian's heart, Arcturus had been his right arm. And yet, even then, their fates had begun to diverge. The memory shifted, time's tapestry unfolding. Valian saw himself in the great council chamber, surrounded by the early founders of the Empire. The air had been filled with hope. Plans of peace, reforms, advancements, new educational networks that would unify countless cultures. Valian had spoken of an age where war would finally become distant memory. His voice had been strong, unwavering. The bow of history bent to the certainty of his conviction. But Arcturus had watched him not with pride, but with concern. "Peace is fragile," Arcturus had said later, when the two walked alone on the terrace above the Capitol gardens. "If we allow ourselves to soften, we will be devoured. You know this. We carved this empire from the void. The void waits to swallow it back." Valian had shaken his head then, his voice calm but sure. "Strength will remain, but it will be strength guided by wisdom, not fear." Arcturus had looked at him, and for the first time, Valian had seen distance there, a small fracture, nothing large enough to name, but a beginning. The memory dimmed, fading like smoke, and Valian returned to the chamber. The presence settled around him again, heavy like armor that could not be removed. "I thought," Valian said quietly, "that unity could be eternal, that loyalty could withstand time, that belief could remain pure. And it did, Erin replied gently. For a while. Valian's gaze lowered. A while is never enough for those who do not change. His hand drifted toward another memory projection. The early wars of expansion, fleets gliding through dark nebulae, golden lances of energy splitting the void, his voice commanding legions with clarity and conviction. Worlds brought into the Imperium not by chains, but by choice, believing that protection under the Celestium banner meant prosperity, safety, identity. The Empire had not begun in conquest. It had begun in hope, and it was that hope that made the fall unbearable. The people did not fear us then, Erin said softly. They sang your name. They built monuments for you, not from obligation, but from admiration. Valian closed his eyes, and now those monuments burn. Silence settled between them, but it was not empty. It was full of the weight of what had been lost. Yet something had led to this moment, something that had begun long before the Empire cracked, something subtle, insidious, disguised as salvation, the Immortality Pact. Valian's breath slowed, though not from hesitation. The memory of that choice lived deeper than any wound. It was the turning of the tide, the moment the future solidified into tragedy. We will go to the Vault of First Light, Valian said at last. Erin stiffened. He had never heard those words spoken. That place was myth even among the highest ranks, sealed, forbidden, sacred. My lord, if we open that vault, the past will be revealed, Valian finished. All of it, as it truly happened. Erin bowed his head. Then I walk with you. Valian turned toward the exit of the chamber. The doors opened with a whisper. The air outside felt colder and heavier. The path to truth had begun, and there was no turning back now. The corridors leading to the Vault of First Light wound deep beneath the citadel, descending past layers of stone older than any recorded era. The deeper Valian and Erin walked, the heavier the air seemed to become, as though the very gravity of memory pulled downward. The walls here were smooth and almost silvered, veined with threads of stasis light that pulsed like a slow, ancient heartbeat. No guard stood watch. No scrolls recorded what lay below. This was a place known only to a few, and remembered by even fewer. Erin's footsteps echoed slightly behind Valian's, measured, controlled. Yet even the unwavering discipline of the Seraphic Guard could not conceal the tension in his voice when he finally spoke. I had thought the vault was only spoken of in ceremonial creed, a metaphor for beginnings. Valian did not stop walking. Some truths are disguised as metaphors, so history does not tear itself apart attempting to understand them. Erin nodded, but he did not ask more. The silence resumed, steady and unbroken, until the tunnel opened into a chamber vast enough to hold the memory of a star. The ceiling arched so high that the faint glow of stasis lamps vanished into shadow. Pillars of obsidian and light held the chamber's weight, and in its center stood a circular platform surrounded by 9 standing monoliths. Each monolith held inscriptions in a language older than the Imperium, older than any known civilization. This was the place where eternity had first been offered. Valian stepped forward, his gaze steady but shadowed with something deeper than regret. He had stood here once before, when the Empire was still young, when his heart had still believed that sacrifice could be chosen without cost. The memory came to him not as a vision conjured by technology, but as something living within him, undying. He remembered the chamber lit with gathering light, the 9 founders standing beside him, Seraphine among them, Arcturus at his right hand. Their empire was rising then, but threats came from all directions. External warlords, internal schisms, the slow but inevitable erosion of unity. And Valian had felt the weight of leadership tightening like a noose. The offer had come from the ruins of the world known as Therion Fur, where an ancient race had left behind artifacts and knowledge beyond mortal understanding. Their histories spoke of transcendence, of stepping beyond the boundaries of life and time. Their bodies had not endured, but their technology had. Seraphine had argued to leave it untouched. "We must not shape eternity," she had said, her voice quiet but resolute. "Life draws meaning from its fragility." Arcturus had countered her, steady, strong. "Meaning falters if the empire falls. If we die, everything we built dies with us. We cannot gamble the future on chance." Valian had stood between them, torn. Seraphine's belief that life should end, so that love and identity remained precious. Arcturus's belief that to protect the galaxy, one must outlast it. And he chose, not for pride, not for power, but from fear. Fear of losing everything. He stepped onto the central platform now, and the monoliths awakened, their inscriptions glowing like molten metal. The air shimmered as if heat rose from the stone, though the chamber grew only colder. "The world believed immortality was a gift," Valian said, and his voice did not break, though the truth had broken him long ago. But it was the first fracture. Erin studied the monoliths, his eyes narrowing as he deciphered portions of the ancient script. There were conditions. "There are always conditions," Valian murmured. "But we convinced ourselves that sacrifice was noble, that the cost would be borne only by us. We were wrong. The transformation that granted them immortality had not made them divine. It had made them enduring. Their flesh no longer aged. Their cells no longer decayed. They healed from wounds that would kill others. But the change had also quieted something inside them, slowly, subtly, the part of the soul that felt time. At first, it had seemed miraculous. Their armies were unstoppable, their leaders timeless, their people secure. Centuries passed in peace and progress. But then something shifted. Love grew distant, passions muted, grief became dull. Emotions that once surged like rivers slowed to stagnant pools. And the people noticed. Where once the citizens saw leaders who cared, now they saw figures who watched, centuries pass with the same stillness as statues. Legends became myths, myths became gods, and gods were not loved, they were feared. Erin walked closer to the dais, expression tense. This was not just a gift, it was a trade. Valian inclined his head. We gained eternity, and lost our humanity. The light from the monoliths flickered, as though matching the tremor in the air. Valian turned away from the platform, his cloak trailing like a shadow behind him. Seraphine knew the danger, he said. She asked me to refuse, to trust the natural course of life, even if it meant one day being forgotten. But I could not bear the thought of the Empire dying. I told myself that her fear was misplaced, that love would survive the centuries. He paused. Love does not survive eternity. It fades beneath it. Erin looked at him, eyes softened not with pity but understanding. And Arcturus? The name lingered like a blade drawn slowly from its sheath. Arcturus believed the Immortality Pact would preserve us, Valian said. But when the changes began, when our emotions dulled, when the distance grew, he thought I had condemned our people. He believed I had chosen control over compassion. He believed I had doomed us all. And Seraphine? Erin's voice was scarcely louder than the hum of the chamber. She left me, Valian answered. Not in hatred, but in sorrow. She said I had become someone she could no longer recognize, someone time had hollowed. His eyes darkened. She left hoping I might one day understand what I had done. Erin's silence spoke more deeply than words. Valian stepped down from the platform, letting the memory fade back into the monoliths, though it did not fade from him. I thought eternity would preserve what mattered, he said. Instead, it ensured that everything I loved would slip away while I remained to witness the loss. The chamber dimmed once more, the monoliths returning to still, silent stone, and it was in the quiet that the first echo of the future stirred. A whisper, not sound, but presence, someone approaching the citadel far above. Erin turned his head sharply, sensing it as well. A vessel has entered the outer range. No identifying signature. Valian's expression did not change, but something deep within him tightened. The past had been remembered. Now the consequences were coming home. The ascent from the vault of first light was a slow one, not because of hesitation, but because Valian could feel the shift in the air from the moment the unknown vessel crossed into Orion's outer orbit. Something had changed. The citadel walls, once silent and unmoving, now hummed with faint alerts as dormant defense systems stirred awake. Erin kept pace beside him, his movements sharpened, every sense drawn to attention. They emerged once more into the higher halls, where thin shafts of pale daylight slipped through shattered archways and dust floated like drifting ash. The landing platforms outside the citadel could be seen from a high vantage balcony. Valian crossed to its edge, stepping into the open air as the wind pulled at his cloak. The sky above was a deep, bruised violet, streaked by the burning trails of earlier bombardments. But now, a new light pierced the horizon. A vessel of smooth, dark metal, angular in design, descending with the controlled grace of a blade lowered onto a throat. It bore no colors, no insignia, no signal codes. Silence accompanied it, save for the crackle of atmospheric friction. Erin's voice was low. "This is no surviving ally." "No," Valian agreed, his gaze steady. "But it is familiar." The ship slowed, hovering just above the landing platform before settling upon the scorched surface. Dust rose, swirling like ghosts around the hull. A long, narrow ramp extended. For a moment, no one emerged. The silence stretched, taut and electric. Then a solitary figure stepped forward. She had not changed in the way mortals changed. Time had not etched itself upon her skin, nor dulled the hue of her hair. Yet the weight she carried now was not the weight of youth, but of memory too sharp to fade. Seraphine descended with slow, deliberate grace, and the wind caught strands of her pale comet-fire hair, casting them like banners behind her. Her robes were not the garments of the Celestium court. They were simpler now, elegant, but worn by travel, shaped by resolve rather than ceremony. Valian did not move from where he stood, but the world beneath him shifted. Erin bowed, but only barely. Seraphine had once outranked all but the Emperor himself. She reached the base of the platform, her feet touching stone scorched by war, and raised her eyes to meet Valian's. For a long moment, nothing existed between them except silence, and the long shadow of everything that had come between. "Valian," she said softly. His voice was quiet, but it carried like a slow tide. "Seraphine." The name itself was a memory. Erin glanced between them, then stepped backward a pace. He understood this was not a moment he belonged to. Seraphine's gaze moved to the ruined skyline. "The Empire has fallen further than I feared." "It was falling long before the war began," Valian replied. "We simply refused to see it." She looked back at him, and there it was, the grief that never faded, and the love that had not survived eternity but refused entirely to die. The air between them was not warm. It was not cold. It was something older, something lingering. "I came because silence can no longer serve us," she said, "and because he is moving again." Valian felt the shift like a blade sliding under armor. He did not need to ask which she meant. The name formed in his thoughts like thunder. Arcturus, the brother he had lost to duty, the ally he had lost to conviction, the friend he had lost to time. Erin's posture tensed. His fleets were broken, his forces scattered. There were no confirmed survivors from his command. "There are always survivors," Seraphine said quietly, "especially when belief does not die with the body." Valian turned from the balcony, the wind pulling his cloak behind him like an unending shadow. "Come inside," he said. "There is more to be spoken than the wind should carry." They walked the halls of the citadel that had once echoed with ceremony and council. Now, those same halls echoed only their footsteps and the settling of dust. The banners overhead fluttered weakly, their once brilliant sigils faded into tired colours. They passed statues of past leaders, sculpted in heroic poses, gazes lifted to imagined futures that now lay buried in ash. Seraphine's eyes trailed over them, and Valian could read her thoughts without asking. They had believed in something magnificent once, and they had been wrong in ways too vast to name. When they reached the council chamber, only fragments of its former grandeur remained. The long table of polished starwood was cracked along its centre. The seats that had once held the Empire's most brilliant voices were empty. The great map projection sphere that once illuminated the galaxy in shimmering detail now flickered with static, entire star systems missing like burnt-out constellations. Seraphine stood at the edge of the fractured table, her fingertips resting lightly on its surface. He has begun gathering those who still believe the Empire can be restored, but not your Empire. His. Valian remained standing. His Empire would not be built on unity. "No," she agreed. "It will be built on grief, on the belief that you abandoned your people, that you chose eternity over love." Erin opened his mouth, but Valian lifted a hand to still him. There was no defense to offer. The truth did not need argument. It simply was. Seraphine stepped closer, her voice soft but unyielding. "He does not hate you, Valian. He never did. He loved you too deeply to forgive you for what you became." The words struck like an old wound reopening. Valian closed his eyes, and for a moment, the room flickered with memory. Arcturus standing beside him, triumphant, proud, unbroken. Then that same figure turning away, his steps heavy with unspoken sorrow. When Valian spoke, his voice carried the weight of ages. "I have walked centuries, Seraphine. I have watched worlds rise and burn. I have seen the consequences of my choice. Yet I cannot undo eternity. I cannot return what was taken." "No," Seraphine said, "but you can decide what remains." Erin stepped forward. "If Arcturus gathers followers, he means to challenge what little stability remains. There will be war again." "There has always been war," Valian murmured. "But this time, it will not be for territory or glory or unity." Seraphine met his gaze. "It will be for the soul of what the Empire was meant to be." Valian turned his face toward the shattered horizon. A wind rose across the city, lifting ash into the air where it spiraled like fallen snow. Somewhere distant, a tower collapsed with a low, sorrowful groan. He knew what must be done, and he knew what it would cost. He inhaled slowly, though he no longer needed breath, and let the truth settle like a blade placed upon the table between old friends. Then the time for remembrance is over. We go to the Asterix Gate. The past had returned, and it would no longer wait. The Asterix Gate lay far from Orion, beyond dust-choked corridors of broken trade routes and abandoned star lanes that had once thrummed with life. Yet before the journey could begin, there were preparations to be made, not of ships or armies, for neither would serve the purpose now unfolding, but of memory and resolve. Valian, Seraphine, and Erind walked together through the citadel's lower hangar vaults, where vessels rested like slumbering beasts beneath shrouds of dust and silence. The air smelled of metal and disuse, and every step stirred faint echoes of what once had been. Valian paused beside a ship carved of obsidian alloys and auric threading, a vessel built not for war, but for passage, swift, silent, precise. He ran a hand across its hull, and ancient systems flickered awake, recognizing his presence. The ship pulsed faintly with life, its engines humming like a distant heartbeat, finding rhythm again after a long sleep. Seraphine watched him, her expression unreadable. "You are certain the Asterix Gate still stands?" "It was constructed to endure beyond memory," Valian replied. "Even now, even after the Empire's collapse, it should remain. It was not built for our age alone." Erind glanced between them. "If Arcturus seeks to use it, then we move into a confrontation he has prepared for long before this day." Seraphine turned her gaze toward the darkened sky beyond the hangar shield. "He has had centuries to convince others that his path is the rightful one, and he learned how to inspire from you." Valian's fingers stilled against the ship's surface. Those words cut more deeply than accusation ever could. Arcturus had learned from him, not only how to command armies, but how to speak to devotion, how to kindle purpose in others. Where Valian had lifted worlds into unity, Arcturus had learned to bind spirits with conviction. He had always understood loyalty not as currency, but as faith, and faith, once turned, became something unstoppable. The hangar doors opened with a grinding sweep of metal, and a gust of cold wind swept inward. Outside, the world of Orion sprawled beneath a twilight haze. Fires still smouldered in distant districts. The scars of war ran across the city like veins of ruin. Yet amidst all this, life clung stubbornly. The people who remained did not flee. They endured, even if endurance was all they had left. As they moved toward the ship's boarding platform, a small group gathered near its edge, civilians, soldiers, and advisors who had remained loyal to Valian even now. Their faces carried the gaunt resolve of those who had seen too much and endured too long. They bowed, not out of ceremony, but respect earned across generations. Among them stood Lord Archivist Selvar, once keeper of the Imperial histories. His hair was silver, his frame thin, but his eyes burned with quiet intensity. He stepped forward, clutching a bound volume of star maps etched into memory paper. "My lord," Selvar said, voice steady despite its weariness, "I bring what remains of the original Asterix path charts. They are incomplete. The wars destroyed much, but some routes may still be traced. Without them, the journey risks losing itself in the dust storms of the void." Valian accepted the maps with a faint incline of his head. "Your service has never diminished, Selvar." Selvar's gaze flicked to Seraphine, and a soft ache passed through his expression. He remembered her as the voice of compassion in the Empire, the one people came to when their burdens grew too heavy. He bowed low to her as well. "It is good that you have returned. Even now your presence steadies the breath of those who still hope." Seraphine's response was gentle, but laced with sorrow. Hope is a fragile thing, but even a flame struggling to survive can still offer warmth. Selvar bowed again and stepped back, allowing them to board the ship. As the ram sealed shut behind them, the outside world dimmed, replaced by the muted hum of internal systems awakening. The interior was sparse, functional panels, navigation hollows, and viewing apertures that opened onto the ruined horizon. Valian moved to the command cradle, its metallic arcs rising to meet him like a crown reclaimed. When his hand rested upon its central node, the ship shuddered with renewed purpose. Systems cascaded online, the engines pulsed, and the hangar began to recede. But before they could clear the atmosphere, a voice broke through the silence. Soft at first, like memory taking shape. "You are leaving," it said. A figure stood near one of the side platforms, one who had not approached earlier, though neither of them failed to recognize him. He was youthful in appearance, though his eyes held centuries of quiet endurance. His armor bore the crest of the Dawnward Sentries, though the crest was cracked through the center. His name was Callius. He had once been a student of Arcturus. Valian met his gaze without turning away. "You have something to say." Callius stepped forward, hands clasped tightly behind his back to restrain the tremor there. "When the Empire fractured, I remained neutral. I could not choose between you and the General. You were both more than leaders. You were pillars. I thought time might heal what broke between you." His voice faltered. Seraphine's eyes softened, but she did not speak. "But time," Callius continued, "does not heal wounds like this. It only deepens them." Valian nodded once. "You are correct." Callius's breath trembled. "If you face him now, there will be no return." Erind leaned forward. "You assume the path is avoidable." Callius looked at him, and there was no naivety in his stare, only pain that had shaped itself into understanding. There is no avoiding fate when two ideals born from the same dream stand opposed. One will remain, the other will become memory. Valian stepped closer, not as emperor, but as the man who had once trained Callius in the war academies of the Golden Age. If you came to speak fear, you speak only truth. But if you came to speak of choice... Callius bowed his head. "I came to offer loyalty, not to a throne, but to the man who taught me that power means nothing without purpose." Silence held. Then Valian placed a hand upon his shoulder. "You honor me, but this journey does not require followers, only accountability." Callius swallowed, but nodded, stepping back with slow reverence. He did not try to stop them. He simply watched as the ship's engines roared to life and the citadel fell away below. The ship cut upward through the violet sky, breaking into high orbit where the stars waited, dim, weary, but still burning. The planet curved beneath them, scarred but alive. Seraphine stood beside the viewing window, her reflection faint among the stars. "Do you think he expected you to come?" Valian's reply was quiet, but absolute. "He has been waiting for it, every moment since the day we diverged." The asterisk coordinates shimmered into view across the holomap. The route was long, the path treacherous, but it was clear. Arcturus had laid his shadow across the stars, and Volian was stepping into it. The journey to the asterisk gate was long, passing through starfields once bright with trade routes, and now dimmed into hushed emptiness. The ship slipped between nebulae, the color of old embers, past shattered orbital stations that still tumbled slowly in silence, and through corridors of space where the echoes of battle still clung to drifting debris. Valian stood at the viewing platform for much of the time, saying little. His presence alone seemed to steady the ship, as though the vessel itself remembered the weight of his command. Seraphine stood beside him, her posture calm but distant, her eyes unfocused, as though she watched more than stars. Something internal, something unraveling. She had returned, yes, but not as the woman she once was. The tension between them was not hostility. It was the soft, slow ache of two orbits that had once aligned perfectly and now drifted close only by the memory of gravity. They did not speak at first, because the silence between them had its own language, one filled with everything neither could apologize for. Erend monitored the controls from the command seat, his attention sharp. He listened to the soft hum of these engines, the subtle fluctuations in warp currents, the faint resonance of cosmic radiation brushing against the vessel's shielding. But even he could feel the shift between Valian and Seraphine, a pressure like slow-forming storm clouds. He said nothing. Warriors of the Seraphic Guard had been trained to understand silence and when to let it run its course. Hours passed. Though aboard an immortal vessel, time felt more like memory than motion. Valian spoke first. "You did not leave only because of the Immortality Pact." Seraphine did not look away from the stars. Her hands rested lightly against the glass, fingers still as though afraid that movement might fracture something inside her. "No, I left because I watched you begin to lose yourself, and I did not know how to save you. You believed I could no longer feel," he said softly. "I believed that you could no longer understand the value of feeling." Her voice was not sharp, only tired, the tiredness of someone who had loved deeply and beyond reason. And when you cannot feel the pain of loss, you cannot understand the meaning of what you hold. You began to see the Empire as something eternal because you could no longer imagine yourself without it. Valian's jaw tightened, but not in anger. "I built the Imperium to protect humanity from the void, to save us from endless collapse." She turned to him, and for the first time since her arrival, her eyes were not distant. They were steady, bright, alive. "But to save us from collapse, you sacrificed what made us human. You wanted to preserve the light of our age so desperately that you smothered the flame to keep it from flickering." Valian did not answer, because she was right. He had always believed the Empire's fall would bring ruin, and perhaps it did. But preserving it through eternity had only created another form of ruin, slower, colder, one that erased love and softened grief until nothing mattered anymore. He had never accepted that truth, until now. Seraphine stepped back from the glass, her presence both fragile and unbreakable. "Arcturus understood what I could not convince you of, that immortality is a war that can never be won." Her voice lowered, almost a whisper. "And he blamed me for failing to stop you." Valian turned toward her, the shift deliberate. "He blamed you. He believed that you would have listened to me, that I was the only one who could have changed your course." Her throat tightened, the smallest tremor in her breath. "But I was not enough, and he could not forgive me for that." Erend, still at the controls, lowered his gaze in silence. The wound was not of Empire. It was of heartbreak. Seraphine continued, her voice steadying, not with ease, but with practiced resolve. "After I left, I traveled to the outer systems. I tried to help the worlds you no longer touched, to heal the people who were no longer seen. I believed that even if the Empire fell, something of what you once were could remain in small acts, small kindnesses." Valian remembered the stories whispered from the frontier. A robed healer who moved like moonlight, tending to worlds abandoned by war. He had never sought her, though he always knew it was her. But Seraphine's voice shifted. Until the day Arcturus found me. Valian's gaze sharpened. Seraphine did not sit. She did not look away. She faced him. He came to me not as the general, but as the man who had once stood beside us both. His armor was damaged. His face was worn. But his conviction burned brighter than it ever had. He asked me to stand with him, to restore the Empire in its mortal form, free of your eternity. And you refused, Valian said quietly. She nodded. I told him that an empire cannot be resurrected, that it must die, and something new must grow from the ashes, that the future should not be shaped by grief or longing, but by acceptance. And he saw your refusal as betrayal. Yes, he saw it as another failure, that I had allowed the empire to fall, that I had abandoned him as I once abandoned you. The silence that followed was heavy, not with anger, but understanding. Pain had shaped all of them, just differently. Suddenly, the ship trembled. A shudder ran through the hull like the touch of distant thunder. Erin straightened at once, fingers flying across control arrays. Unregistered warp disturbance, he said sharply. Localized, close. Something is tracking us. Valian stepped beside him. Arcturus? No, Erin murmured. Not directly. A messenger. The ship's scanners captured the vessel before it appeared visually. Small, sleek, silent. A craft designed not to fight, but to deliver. A transmission cut through the ship's interior. No voice spoke. Instead, the hologram flickered to life. Arcturus's face appeared, unchanged by time, but now defined by a gravity that could break worlds. His eyes, once warm with loyalty, now held the silent ferocity of a man who believed fate had already chosen its victor. He spoke only one sentence. You should not have brought her. The hologram dissolved. Seraphine's breathing stilled. Valian did not move. Erin whispered, My lord, he means to... The ship lurched violently. A strike, not meant to destroy, but to separate. Seraphine reached for the support rail as the floor shifted beneath her. Valian stepped forward to catch her. But in the same instant, the ship's internal shielding flared, dividing corridors, sealing bulkheads, isolating chambers. A containment field surged upward between them, clear as glass, unbreakable as fate. Seraphine stood on one side, Valian on the other. Her eyes widened, not in fear, but in recognition. He doesn't want to stop you, she whispered. He wants to break you. Her hand pressed to the barrier. Valian pressed his against the same point, separated by inches and eternity. Outside, another pulse struck. The ship spun. Gravity broke. The world tilted. And Seraphine was gone. Not dead. Taken. A precision extraction, not an attack. Arcturus had not come to destroy Valian. He had come to reopen the oldest wound. The stars outside stretched into violent, twisting light, and the ship hurtled toward the Asterix gate. The path had been chosen long ago, and now there would be no turning back. The ship steadied after the violent lurch, its engines humming unevenly as Erin struggled to bring the navigation systems under control. Warning sigils flickered across the display glass, casting pulses of red light through the dimmed cabin. Valian remained where he stood, his hand still raised to the transparent divide that was no longer there. The containment field had dissolved the moment Seraphine vanished, as though it had never existed, yet the absence left behind was more tangible than the wall itself had been. Silence filled the vessel like an echo of something vast and hollow. Erin's voice cracked softly through that silence. I am attempting to trace the displacement signal, but the route was masked. The extraction was pre-calculated, precisely timed. His hands moved fast, but his tone had changed, not panicked, but colder, sharper. the voice of a soldier reverting to pure function. Valian lowered his hand slowly. The metal beneath his fingertips felt distant, as though he were touching something from another lifetime. Seraphine's warmth had always been a quiet presence beside him, subtle, steady, grounding. Without her, the air felt thinner, the world sharper, and the weight of centuries heavier. His voice, when it came, was low and controlled. "She is alive." "Yes," Erin replied, though the tension in his jaw betrayed unease. "But if Arcturus has taken her, it will not be to harm her. Not physically." He hesitated. "He knows what she means to you." Valian's gaze shifted to the stars outside. They stretched across the viewport in long, drifting patterns, muted by the ship's shielding. The journey continued, unstoppable, the Asterix gate drawing nearer with every passing moment. He could feel it like a presence, ancient and immense, waiting ahead in the quiet dark. "Arcturus knows what she means to himself as well," Valian murmured. Erin turned to him. "You believe he still—" "Love does not vanish," Valian said. "It changes shape. It becomes devotion, or resentment, or the quiet wish for what once was." He paused, and the silence settled again. What he feels now is not hatred. It is conviction sharpened by grief. The ship passed beyond a nebulous shroud of violet and gold. Wisps of ion dust curled around the hull like the memory of burning wings. The deeper they travelled, the more the stars seemed to dim, not from distance, but from something else. An absence of life, a vastness too silent. This region of space had once been vibrant, filled with trade fleets and diplomatic caravans. Now it was hollow, an echo of the Empire's decline, and the silence was not peace, it was expectation. A low chime sounded, one long steady tone that reverberated through the vessel's structure. Erin straightened. "We are approaching the gate." The viewing glass adjusted, darkening to filter the rising luminosity. At first, there was only darkness, the empty void of interstellar waste. But then, like a celestial eye opening, the structure came into view. The Asterix gate. It stretched across the void like the skeleton of a dead god, an immense ring of blackstone and star metal. Fractured spires jutted outward, their surfaces etched with runes that glowed faintly with the memory of power. The gate did not move, did not pulse, did not hum, but its presence filled the air with a pressure that was neither physical nor emotional, but something deeper, a weight of purpose, a remnant of an age that understood eternity differently than mortals did. Valian felt it settle into his mind like something remembered, not learned. Erin exhaled slowly. This place was never meant to be touched again. "No," Valian answered. "But we touched it, and the universe has not been the same since." As they drew closer, the gate began to shift, not in motion, but in meaning. Runes awakened in sequence, lighting across its vast circumference. The ring did not rotate, yet space within it twisted. Stars bent, light curved. The void rippled as though stirred by an unseen hand. The gate was not a doorway, it was a choice. It did not force passage, it tested those who sought it. And now, something else stirred. Multiple signatures appeared on the long-range scanners, faint at first, then growing, then sharpening into precise formation lines. They emerged from behind broken asteroids and fractured moon splinters. Ships, silent, predatory, formation tight. They bore no banners, no imperial markings, only matte black hulls, the color of ash after flame, Arcturus's fleet. Erin's stance shifted, grounded. "They have been waiting for us." "No," Valian said. "They have been waiting for me." The fleet did not fire. It did not advance or retreat. It formed a wall, a line drawn not across territory, but across meaning. A quiet declaration. You may pass only if you believe you should. Valian stepped away from the viewport. His voice was composed again, the calm that had once led armies across galaxies. Open communications. Erin complied. The channel opened with a low, static crackle. No face appeared, no voice. Only a soft, resonant pulse, like a heartbeat, measured in centuries. Valian did not speak to the channel. He spoke to Arcturus. You took her not to harm her, he said steady. You took her to remind me of the moment everything fractured, the moment I chose eternity over love. The channel remained silent. But hear this. His tone did not rise. It did not need to. I come not to rebuild what was lost, but to understand what remains. The silence deepened, and then a voice answered. Quiet, steady, and filled with the weight of something irrevocable. I know. Arcturus. The sound of his voice was like a scar reopened, not bleeding, remembering. You seek the gate, Arcturus continued. You seek truth, as I did, as she did. But truth is not found by preserving what was. It is found by accepting what must end. Valian closed his eyes briefly. Then let us end this not as warlords. A pause, as brothers. The silence held for a long, eternal moment. Then Arcturus answered. No, not as brothers. Not anymore. The fleet shifted formation, not to attack, but to escort. A corridor of ships opened, leading directly to the Asterix Gate, trust, or something like it, shaped by pain instead of faith. Erin glanced at Valian. We follow. Yes, Valian said. The ship moved, slowly, deliberately, toward the gate. As they crossed its threshold, the stars dissolved into white, not light. Memory. The war did not begin with the clash of swords. It began in silence, between two souls who once shared the same dream. The transition through the Asterix Gate was not movement in any way that could be measured. There was no sense of forward motion, no acceleration or deceleration. Space did not stretch, nor did time bend in familiar patterns. Instead, the universe simply changed around them, as though the ship had not travelled, but the stars themselves had rearranged to form a new sky. The viewing glass flickered once, and the darkness outside was replaced with a deep avenue of starlight, a corridor of ancient constellations that no longer existed anywhere else. The gate had not transported them across distance, but into memory, into a realm that preserved what reality had abandoned. Valian stood without speaking. The light that filtered through the glass was not warm nor cold. It had the feeling of something old enough to no longer belong to any known spectrum. Erin adjusted the controls carefully, though most navigation was irrelevant here. The path was dictated by the gate itself, and somewhere ahead, beyond this corridor of quiet stars, Arcturus waited. The stars shifted slowly, forming shapes that hinted at worlds once conquered, speeches once delivered, alliances once forged. Ghosts of triumphs long faded, yet the gate was not cruel. It did not force remembrance. It simply reflected what one carried. For Valian, the reflections were endless. Erin finally broke the silence. This place, it feels alive. It is alive, Valian replied. Not in the way a creature breathes, but in the way a memory endures. It is a construct built to hold the weight of every choice that shaped the Empire. It reflects the mind of the one who enters. Erin exhaled slowly, as though steadying himself. Then what we see now is not the past, but the truth we tried to ignore. Valian did not correct him. There was nothing to correct. Ahead, the constellation corridor widened, revealing a vast plain of space dotted with floating structures. They resembled cities, but without ground or foundation. Monuments of black stone and ethereal crystal suspended in the void. Some were pristine, others fractured into drifting shards. They were not physical, they were echoes. In the center of this impossible expanse was a dais of obsidian that stretched outward like the surface of a silent lake. And standing upon it, no armor, no helmet, no soldiers, was Arcturus. He had not changed in appearance. His form was strong, upright, still carrying the posture of a commander who had once faced down the end of worlds. His eyes held intensity, but not rage. The fire within him was focused, shaped, deliberate. He did not look like a traitor. He looked like a believer. The ship slowed to a hover above the dais, and Valian stepped forward. The ramp lowered with a soft hiss of pressure equalization. Erind moved beside him. Valian shook his head once. "I go alone." Erin's jaw tightened. He took her. "This is not a parley." "It is not a battle either," Valian said. "Not yet." The certainty in his tone left no room for argument. Erind stepped back. Valian descended the ramp, his footsteps silent against the ancient stone of the dais. No air stirred here. No sound carried beyond what was spoken. The void around them was absolute, not empty, but listening. Arcturus watched him approach, expression unreadable. When Valian reached speaking distance, he halted. The distance between them was measured, intentional. Neither too close nor too far. The space where trust once lived, now filled with something heavier. Arcturus spoke first. "You came sooner than I expected." Valian's tone was controlled, but not cold. "You ensured I would." A faint flicker of emotion crossed Arcturus's face, a shadow of irony, almost a smile, but not warmth. "I ensured nothing. I offered a reminder. The choice was yours." "You took her," Valian said. Arcturus met his gaze with steady calm. "She was leaving again, not from you alone, from all of this. She could not bear to witness what must come." Valian felt a quiet ache beneath his ribs. Not pain, not grief, but recognition of truth delivered without cruelty. "Where is she now?" "Safe," Arcturus answered. "Somewhere beyond this place. Somewhere untouched by the ruin we shaped." A long silence passed, the kind that could split worlds if given enough time. Valian spoke softly. "You believe this path leads to salvation?" "I know it does." Arcturus stepped closer, not aggressively, but with the certainty of one who no longer questioned his purpose. "The immortality you chose fractured the foundation of everything we built. The people followed us because they believed we understood them. And now you stand above time itself. How can you lead those whose lives burn and fade, like brief stars? How can one guide what one no longer feels?" Valian did not deny it. "I lost the measure of what I swore to protect." Arcturus's expression shifted, not triumph, not condemnation, but something quieter. "Sorrow. I did not want to stand against you. I wanted to stand with you, but you would not see what was being taken from us, so I chose to save what I could." "By tearing the Empire apart," Valian said, though the accusation held no edge. "By preventing it from becoming a hollow monument to a forgotten dream," Arcturus corrected. "If the Empire must die to preserve the memory of what it once meant, then let it die. Let something mortal rise in its place, something that can feel again." The silence between them deepened, thick as gravity. Valian stepped closer. "And Seraphine?" Arcturus's gaze did not waver. "She reminded me that grief is not a wound. It is a compass. It points to what mattered, what still matters. I do not intend to harm her. I intend to show her that her belief in us was not wasted. And me? Valian asked. What do you intend to show me? Arcturus's voice softened, not weak, but unbearably human. The truth you refuse to face, that eternity is not a gift, it is a prison, and you are its warden. The stars above flickered, not with light, but with memory. Valian spoke, the words heavy. Then why bring me here? Why not end this when the Empire fractured? Because ending you would change nothing, Arcturus replied. To break the cycle, you must choose the end yourself. Valian felt the weight settle, not forced, not inflicted, but revealed. A choice long avoided. To let the Empire die, not in war, but in acceptance. Arcturus extended his hand, not in alliance, not in challenge, in invitation. Come with me to the fracture point. Let us finish what we began, not as rulers, not as immortals, but as men who once believed the same dream. Valian looked at the hand. The memory of their brotherhood rose, young, unbound by centuries, driven by hope instead of fear. He stepped forward, but before he could speak, the stars shuddered, the void trembled, the gate flickered. Something else had entered, not Arcturus, not Valian, something older, something watching. Arcturus's expression hardened. Time is ending faster than I planned. Valian's gaze sharpened. The war had not begun, but everything was already collapsing toward its center. The disturbance that rippled through the Asterix gate was not sound nor light, but a change in the texture of space itself, like a silent tremor running beneath reality. The stars dimmed, not fading, but receding, as though something vast and unseen moved between them. Valian felt the shift, a pressure behind the eyes, a weight on the bones that immortality could not dull. Arcturus's expression tightened, not with fear, but recognition. He had expected this, feared it perhaps, but had hoped it would come later. Time had accelerated. The universe no longer waited for their decision. Erind emerged from the ship, stepping onto the obsidian surface of the dais. His posture was firm, but his gaze darted between Valian and Arcturus, reading the space between their stillness. He knew better than to speak. The silence itself was a battlefield now. Then, in the space beyond the dais, sleek silhouettes appeared, ships, hundreds of them, slipping out of the void like ghosts taking form. They bore the jagged, sun-scorched insignia of the sundered legions, the remnants of once loyal fleets who had turned not to Arcturus nor to Valian, but to something older, something whispering in the fracture left by immortality's slow erosion. Erind spoke under his breath. The fractured host. Arcturus did not look away from Valian. Those who believe the Empire belongs to no one who survived it. They want a new beginning, one built not from memory, but from obliteration. As if in answer, the lead vessel shifted position, revealing something suspended between massive pylons of metallic bone and stardust fields. It was not a ship. It was a relic, no, a weapon, one forged in the darkest era of the Empire's expansion. Valian recognized it instantly. The Erindor Gate Shroud, he whispered. It was a device meant to collapse star lanes, an instrument of absolute isolation, designed to cut off worlds from the network that sustained them. Created as a last resort, never used. Erind inhaled sharply, realizing the implication. If they activate it here, the Asterix gate will collapse. And with it, Arcturus said quietly, every memory that remains of what we built. The sundered legions had not come to join either side. They had come to erase the past. A transmission flared across the dais. A voice spoke, not cold, not furious, but calm and deeply certain. We are the broken dawn. We are the children of an empire that forgot the cost of its own existence. We will not allow the past to shape the future any longer. Stand aside. Let history end. Arcturus's jaw tightened. They believe that nothing sacred remains. Valian stepped forward, the obsidian beneath him glowing faintly with his movement. And they are wrong. Even in ruin, memory matters. Even in loss, love remains. The broken dawn replied with quiet finality. Memory is a chain. Love is a wound. Both keep the universe from healing. Space trembled again. The gate shroud began to awaken. Its pylons glowed with a cold, pale radiance, the color of starlight stripped of warmth. Energy gathered, spiraling inward toward a single point above the structure. If the shroud reached full power, the Asterix gate would collapse, and everything it held, every echo, every fragment of meaning, every memory that had shaped their choices, would scatter into undifferentiated void. Erin's voice sharpened into command. We must stop the activation. Arcturus looked to Valian. This is your decision, not mine. Valian understood. The war now unfolding was not the one between him and Arcturus. It was the war born from the consequences of their shared past. This was not a battlefield of conquest. It was a battleground of meaning. He raised his hand, signaling Erin to the ship, but Erin didn't move. My lord, he said steady, if we pursue the shroud, the broken dawn will target you directly. They will attempt to sever you from the gate. If you enter that line of fire alone, I will not fall, Valian said. Erin's eyes held grief, not doubt, but sorrow for the path ahead. He bowed once and sprinted back toward the vessel, activating its weapons and propulsion systems. Arcturus turned his gaze toward the encroaching fleets. Your presence here is the fulcrum, Valian. They do not want to destroy the Empire. They want to erase the idea that it ever existed. To remove your memory is to free the galaxy from what they see as our sin. They know if you fall, the past dies. Valian stepped toward the edge of the dais, the stars reflecting in the obsidian like constellations trapped in glass. Then I will not fall. Arcturus's expression shifted, something like grief passing behind his eyes. You speak as though immortality still shields you. Valian looked at him. It never shielded me. It imprisoned me. The moment hung between them. Not an argument, not accusation, only truth. The fleets closed in. Erin's ship broke formation, streaking toward the gate shroud. Its engines flared with white fire, its shielding shimmering with strain as it hurtled toward the gathering vortex of collapsing space. Valian could feel the echo of Erin's resolve, sharp and unwavering. The first volley of fire erupted, silent in the vacuum, violent in its brilliance. Beams of pale energy lanced toward the small vessel. Erin weaved through them, engines screaming, pushing the ship beyond its limits. Valian watched, but he did not move to help. He couldn't. This was not his battle. Not yet. His eyes remained fixed on the structure in the center of the broken dawn formation, where something flickered behind crystalline shielding, faint and warm and unmistakably familiar. Seraphine, not bound, not restrained, standing, watching. Her presence was stillness in the storm. Arcturus followed Valian's gaze. She asked to be here. She wanted to see which of us would break first. Valian's voice was quiet. She never believed in victory, only in understanding. Arcturus nodded once, then let her understand. The gate shroud neared full power. Space vibrated. Stars bent. The universe held its breath. Erin's ship dove toward the core, and in that suspended instant, Valian stepped forward. not to stop the shroud, not to command the fleets, not to reclaim an empire, but to face Arcturus, the brother of his soul, the fracture of his eternity. Neither reached for a weapon. The war had begun long before they ever lifted a blade, and now, at last, they would speak the final truth. Empires do not fall when armies collapse. They fall when the hearts that built them finally break. The light from the gate shroud flickered across the void, casting long shadows through the shattered star lanes. The airless expanse trembled as energy gathered into a ceaseless spiral, threads of space twisting inward toward collapse. Erin's vessel streaked toward the device, engines burning white-hot, while the formations of the broken dawn shifted and reorganized, their ships drifting like silent carrion birds preparing for a feast. The battlefield was not defined by explosions or fire. It was defined by silence, the stillness before the inevitable fall. Valian and Arcturus stood across from one another, neither drawing a weapon, neither raising a shield. The space between them was small, yet it seemed vast, filled with the echoes of 1,000 shared victories, 1,000 shared wounds. They had once stood here not as enemies, but as brothers who believed the stars themselves could be reshaped. Now, the remnants of those beliefs hovered around them like dust suspended in a dying sunbeam. The air shifted, not physically, but perceptibly, as Seraphine stepped forward from the crystalline shell at the center of the broken dawn's formation. She walked without hesitation, crossing an invisible boundary between memory and present. Her bare feet touched the obsidian platform soundlessly. She wore no armor, no markings of allegiance, only a simple garment of pale cloth that moved like water around her. There was no fear in her steps, only purpose. Valian watched her approach, but his body did not move. Arcturus watched her too, and something in his expression softened, though the softness did not bring comfort. It was the tenderness of a man who had already accepted loss. Seraphine reached them and stood between them, not as mediator, not as judge, but as the only constant thread that had ever bound them together. Her voice was quiet, but it carried through the void. "You both came here seeking truth," she said, "but neither of you understood what truth demands." Valian felt the words settle inside him, familiar. Seraphine had always spoken like that. Never with accusations, never with blame, only with clarity sharp enough to cut without drawing blood. Arcturus lowered his gaze, not in shame, but in acknowledgement. "We stand here because eternity broke us." "No," Seraphine replied gently. "Eternity did not break you. You chose to break yourselves, trying to carry eternity alone." Valian closed his eyes. The gate shroud pulsed again, brighter now, the gravitational distortion spreading outward. Stars bent, distorting into elongated streaks, and Erin, locked in the ship's control harness, pushed the engines further still. The vessel shuddered violently, the hull glowing with strain. If he reached the core, he could destabilize the apparatus, but the cost would be absolute. Seraphine looked toward the distant vessel, her voice trembling only then. "He will die if he completes the run." Valian did not respond, because he had known the moment Erin accelerated. Arcturus turned his face upward, watching the silent struggle play out. He makes his choice, as we make ours. Seraphine's eyes dimmed with quiet grief. Every choice we ever made was layered in sacrifice. But some sacrifices become prisons when we refuse to let go. Valian opened his eyes then, the weight inside him shifting. "You left because you could not watch us destroy ourselves." She looked at him, and the love there was not the love of the Golden Age. Not the love of warmth shared in palace gardens or in quiet chambers during peacetime, but the love that survives sorrow. Deep, painful, enduring. I left because I could not stop it, she said. And now? Arcturus asked. Seraphine turned to him. Now I understand. I could not stop you then, but I can stand with you now, not to choose one of you, but to remind you of who you were. The energy from the gate shroud surged again, expanding. The obsidian dais trembled. The memory constellations flickered. The corridor of stars began to dim. The past was unraveling. Arcturus drew a slow breath. Then show us, before everything ends. Seraphine stepped closer to them both, lifting her hands, one resting lightly upon Valian's chest, the other upon Arcturus'. Her touch was not warm, it was something deeper. Recognition, memory, a reminder of the first reason they ever fought for the Empire. In that contact, the Asterix gate responded. The starlight around them rippled and shifted. The void unfolded like cloth being pulled away from a window. And suddenly, they were not standing upon obsidian, nor surrounded by fleets, nor facing collapse. They were standing on the terrace of the Hall of Dawn, as it had once been centuries ago. The city below was whole, its dome spires gleaming with morning light. Children laughed in distant courtyards. Bells chimed across bridges suspended in air like silver threads. The Empire was young here, unbroken, hopeful, and the three of them stood together, their younger selves reflected in their eyes. Not illusions, not fabrications, but memories held so deeply they had shaped the universe around them. Valian saw himself, radiant, unburdened, his armor gleaming like starlight caught in metal. He remembered the certainty he once held, that the Empire was a promise that could outlast pain, loss, death. Arcturus saw himself, strong, loyal, fearless. He had believed more fiercely than anyone that Valian's vision could reshape the stars. His devotion had not come from obedience, it had come from love. Seraphine saw herself, gentle but unbreakable. The one who had believed that the Empire's strength came not from power or unity of rule, but from compassion held between those who built it. Then the vision flickered, fractures spreading through its edges. The memory could not hold against the reality of the present. Seraphine withdrew her hands. The terrace dissolved. They stood once more upon the obsidian dais beneath the flickering starlight of the shroud. Valian spoke softly. We were greatest when we believed in one another. Arcturus met his gaze, pain and clarity merging. We fell when we believed we could save the Empire alone. Seraphine's eyes glistened. You do not have to save it. You only have to let it end with grace. The gate shroud surged one final time. Erin's ship reached the core. And in that instant, Valian knew what came next. If the shroud collapsed, the memory realm would shatter. The Empire's legacy would scatter into nothing. The past would become unremembered. Unless Valian stepped forward and placed his hand over Arcturus's extended hand. A vow reforged, not of command, not of conquest, but of acceptance. Arcturus exhaled, a sound of release, not victory, not defeat. Seraphine closed her eyes. Erin struck the core. The gate shroud collapsed in a burst of silent white. The stars shattered. The memory realm cracked. The Empire finally let go, and the echo of all they once were began to fall. The world returned in fragments, not as a clean transition, but as a collapse of illusions and memory. The obsidian dais beneath them cracked in jagged lines, splitting outward like veins of frost across dark glass. The stars overhead flickered wildly, not fading but breaking. Shards of light scattering through the void, dissolving into threads of silver fire. The Asterix gate itself groaned like an ancient titan waking beneath the crushing weight of its own existence. What Erind had done had not merely damaged the shroud, it had unravelled the lattice of memory that held this realm together. Valian felt the shift deep in his bones, immortal bones that had not felt weakness in centuries. The ground buckled beneath him, but he did not fall. Arcturus stood opposite him, bracing himself, fists clenched, jaw set, eyes locked on the collapsing firmament. Seraphine stood between them, her hair lifted by a wind that did not exist, the pale strands glowing with the fading residue of the gate's ancient energy. The void trembled again, and the memory cities suspended in the distance shattered like sculptures dropped from impossible heights. Towers crumbled into dust, bridges dissolved into streams of light, spires collapsed inward into nothing. The reflections of their past were not being erased. They were being released, as though the universe was exhaling something it had held for far too long. Valian watched the collapse and felt the echoes of lives he had once known. Faces of soldiers who had laughed beneath banners of gold, children who had run through palace courtyards with ribbons trailing behind them, scholars who had debated philosophy beneath lanterns glowing like twin moons. Their lives were not fading. They were being freed from the burden of memory. It was not loss. It was surrender. Yet surrender had a cost. A sound rose across the void, not a scream, not a roar, but something more ancient, a resonance, a vibration that trembled through the very structure of the realm. The kind of sound that accompanied endings written into the bones of time itself. The gate had begun to collapse. Arcturus spoke first, his voice steady but heavy with something deeper than regret. It has begun. The Empire's last echo is ending. Valian turned toward him, the weight in his voice no longer concealing anything. It was always going to end. We only delayed it. Seraphine's gaze lifted toward the unraveling constellations. The universe knows when it is time to release what has lingered too long. Arcturus looked at her, and for the first time since this war began, the fire in his eyes softened, not quenched, but gentled. You said we were meant to build something new, something mortal. But what remains of us, Seraphine? What remains when the past is gone? When our immortality becomes a memory instead of a prison? Seraphine's eyes closed for a moment, and when she opened them again, they were bright with the clarity of someone who had walked through grief and come out changed. What remains is choice, not the choice of gods, the choice of humans. The ground split further. A wide, jagged fracture opened across the dais, separating Valian and Arcturus by several steps. Neither moved to cross it. They simply watched each other. Valian spoke quietly. We tried to save the Empire, both of us, but we built it on fear of losing what we loved. Arcturus nodded once, slowly, and fear shapes nothing but ruin. Another tremor struck, harder this time. The collapse was accelerating. In the distance, Erin's ship spiraled, its engines sputtering. The vessel had reached the core, but the impact had not been clean. The hull glowed red-hot, molten metal peeling away in sheets as the ship descended through the dissolving memory plane. Valian felt something flicker inside him at the sight. Not grief, not panic, but the terrible quiet of understanding. Erind had known. He had accepted. The ship exploded in a burst of white light, silent, bright, final. Seraphine bowed her head once, not in mourning, in respect. Arcturus looked away from the destruction, jaw trembling briefly, not from sorrow for the death of a warrior he barely knew, but from the recognition of what that sacrifice meant. A life given freely to protect a truth larger than any empire. Valian breathed in, though no breath was needed. The memory realm was nearly gone now. Only the dais remained, suspended in the vast hollow of unraveling existence. "It is time," Seraphine said. Arcturus met her gaze. "Time for what? Redemption?" Her voice was gentle. "No, for acceptance." Valian took a single step forward, the fracture beneath him stabilizing briefly, as though the realm itself acknowledged the weight of his decision. "The Empire is gone. Its memory is no longer ours to hold. What remains is what we become now." Arcturus looked at him, not with rivalry, not with anger, but with a sorrowful recognition so deep it felt like a wound long denied. "You would walk into mortality?" Valian nodded once. "Yes." Arcturus swallowed, and his voice broke, just slightly. "After all of this, you would choose death?" Valian held his gaze. "Death is not the end. It is simply the return to the cycle we tried to escape. We thought eternity was protection, but it was imprisonment. If we love the world we tried to protect, we must return to it, as part of it, not above it." A long silence passed. Then Arcturus inhaled, unsteady, and nodded. Not in surrender, but in release. Seraphine stepped forward, placing her hands on both their shoulders, not to bind them, but to accompany them. The last of the memory realm dissolved around them, the stars collapsing inward to a single point of white light. The light expanded, then broke, and the universe returned. Cold air rushed across them, carrying the scent of ash, stone, and distant burning skies. They stood upon the surface of Orion once more. Its towers collapsed, its banners burned, its plazas empty beneath the pale light of a dying sun. The Empire was gone. The world was quiet. The war was over. Valian exhaled. Arcturus looked down at his hands, hands that no longer held the weight of eternity. They trembled, not with weakness, but with the overwhelming sensation of feeling returning. Pain, regret, humanity. Seraphine closed her eyes, and her tears fell freely. For the first time in centuries, all three of them were mortal again. The ruin around them was real. The cost was real. But so was the possibility of something new. No empire, no throne, no eternity, just life, and life was enough. The wind moved gently across the broken city, carrying away the last echoes of a golden age. In silence, the three of them stood together, not as rulers, not as legends, but as who they truly were. And the galaxy, scarred but breathing, waited for its next chapter to begin. The wind swept across the shattered terraces of Orion, carrying dust, ash, and the faint smell of burned stone. The sun hung low, dim and strained, as though it too bore the weight of centuries of conflict. Valian, Arcturus, and Seraphine stood together in the quiet aftermath of the world's unraveling. Their immortality had slipped from them like an old cloak, leaving their bodies unfamiliar, heavier, slower in ways that felt startlingly alive. Every breath now mattered. Every heartbeat carried weight. For a long time, none of them spoke. There was nothing to say that words had not already carried in silence. Valian's gaze travelled across the ruined skyline. Towers that had once gleamed like celestial beacons lay half-collapsed, their skeletal frames exposed. The great plazas where thousands had once gathered in celebration were now overgrown with wind-scattered dust and creeping vines. Statues of heroes and saints stood broken at the waist, toppled by time or war or indifference. And yet, beneath all of that ruin, something stirred, a faint hum, a flicker of movement, signs of life that had not been extinguished, only quieted. Arcturus sank to one knee, one hand braced to the ground, as though the earth itself had shifted beneath him. The sudden strain of mortality struck him harder than he expected. The armor he wore felt impossibly heavy now. His breath came sharp and uneven, sweat gathering across his brow. He had forgotten what exhaustion felt like. He had forgotten pain. Seraphine knelt beside him, resting her hand lightly against his shoulder. Her touch was gentle, but it did not linger. She understood that comfort was not something Arcturus needed, not in this moment. He needed to understand the shape of himself again. "It is real," she said softly. "All of it. Your breath, your heartbeat, your pain." Arcturus closed his eyes. "I thought I wanted this, to feel again, to live again. But I had imagined it differently." His voice caught, edged with something raw. "I did not expect it to hurt." Valian stepped closer, his own steps heavy, unfamiliar. "Pain is not punishment. It is proof," he said. "Proof that we belong to the world again." Arcturus looked up at him, eyes fierce, but no longer burning with conviction. That fire had changed. It had softened into something more human. Grief, acceptance, longing. "And what do we belong to now, Valian? A broken empire? A memory no one can carry? The people will not know us. The galaxy will move without us." "Yes," Valian said, "and that is as it should be." Seraphine rose to her feet, stepping between them. The breeze lifted her hair, the strands catching what little sunlight remained. The empire was never meant to last forever. It was meant to inspire, to build meaning, to teach the galaxy what unity looked like. That lesson remains, even if our banners fall. Arcturus stood slowly, pushing himself up with unsteady strength. He turned to face Valian fully. There was no hatred in his gaze, no rivalry, only the hollow space where those things had once lived. "If we step away, if we allow the Empire's memory to fade, what becomes of us? What purpose remains for those who once shaped the stars?" Valian took a slow breath, an act that felt strangely monumental. "We learned to be people again." The wind shifted, carrying with it a distant sound, movement, voices, not soldiers, but survivors, families, workers, the remnants of Orion's population moving carefully through ruined avenues, unaware of the three figures who had shaped their fate. Life was returning in small steps. Arcturus watched them, eyebrows furrowing slightly. The sight struck something deep within him, something both hopeful and devastating. "They rebuild." "Yes," Seraphine replied. "Not for us, for themselves." There was a long, still silence. Then Arcturus spoke, his voice quiet but steady. "There is one thing left to do." Valian understood before the words formed. Not vengeance, not dominance, closure. They moved together across the broken courtyard, stopping at the base of what once had been the grand reflecting spire. The spire was shattered now, a jagged monolith, rising only half its original height. Its surface was marred by scorch marks and fractures, but in one smooth panel of polished stone, a single reflection still remained. Three figures, once immortal, now human. Arcturus drew his blade, not the weapon of an immortal commander, but a sword of fold steel from a world long gone. Its edge was sharp, but not impossibly so. A blade meant to cut, but only if guided by intention. Valian drew his in return. The motion felt different now, not effortless, not inevitable, but heavy with choice. Seraphine did not move to stop them, because she knew this was not a duel of death. It was the last echo of the Empire itself, taking form. Arcturus stepped forward, blade raised in a simple guard. "Not for conquest," he said. Valian mirrored him. Not for atonement. Arcturus nodded. But to understand who we are without the throne. The air stilled. They moved. The clash was not grand. It did not shake the ground or ignite the air. It was quiet. Two warriors who knew each other's movements before they were made, their strikes measured, precise, respectful. Steel met steel with clean ringing notes. Dust lifted around their feet. Breath came harsh, weighted with humanity. They circled each other, not as enemies, but as men seeking the shape of themselves. Arcturus moved first, swift, angled, controlled. Valian countered smoothly, redirecting rather than resisting. Arcturus smiled faintly, tired but real. You always preferred defense, he murmured. And you always mistook patience for reluctance, Valian answered. Another exchange, a parry, a shift of weight. Arcturus stumbled, not from weakness of skill, but from the sudden sharpness of lungs burning for breath. Mortality cut deeper than steel. Valian hesitated, and that hesitation was everything. Arcturus lowered his blade. The duel ended, not by force, but by acceptance. Arcturus exhaled, breath shaking, shoulders loosening. His sword dropped from his fingers, striking the stone with a muted clang. I cannot be who I was, he said. You don't have to be, Valian replied. Seraphine stepped forward, placing her hand atop both their still hearts. The empire ends here, she said, but the people live, and we live. Let that be enough. The wind carried the sound of rebuilding from the city below, children's laughter, hammers striking stone, voices calling to one another, new life forming. Valian looked at Arcturus. Arcturus looked at Seraphine, and the three of them stood together, not as rulers, not as immortals, but as the quiet witnesses of a world beginning again. No throne, no empire, no eternity. Only the future, unknown, fragile, and precious. And they stepped forward into it. The air of Orion carried a new stillness, one that did not belong to triumph nor defeat. It was the silence that comes after a storm has finished its work, when the world waits to understand what has survived. The broken spires no longer reached for the heavens. They leaned inward, like the skeletons of memories too weary to stand upright. Yet here, where once the banners of the Celestium Imperium had snapped in blazing winds, the city no longer echoed with the footsteps of armies. Only the soft rhythm of rebuilding marked time now. Valian stepped carefully over the cracked stone of the plaza, his boots leaving faint prints in the dust. He felt the weight of his steps, something he had not felt in centuries. Mortality lent consequence to movement. Every muscle had a presence. Every inhale shaped how the world entered him. He paused at the base of the fractured monument that had once commemorated the unification of the first worlds. The statue had been split nearly in half. Its upper portion collapsed into rubble, but the lower figure, its outstretched hand, remained intact. It reached toward a sky that no longer held the same constellations. Arcturus approached from behind, walking more slowly than he once might have. His armor, once a symbol of power, now seemed a burden rather than mantle. He removed the gauntlet from his right hand, flexing fingers that trembled with the effort of regaining strength. This city feels different, he said, though the words were quiet, as if he feared waking something fragile. Feels real, Valian answered. Not preserved, not controlled, simply real. Arcturus exhaled, and the sound was softer than exhaustion, more a release of something long clenched. I once believed the galaxy needed us to guide it, that without us it would fall into ruin. Valian's gaze remained on the outstretched stone hand. We believed we were necessary, that without us the flame of unity would burn out. Arcturus shook his head, faint grief threading his expression. But unity cannot be held by force of will. It lives only where hearts decide to share it. Seraphine joined them then, moving with a grace that mortality had not taken. Her steps were sure, balanced, measured not by memory but by presence. She held no trace of regret in her posture, only a patient awareness that came from having seen too much to cling to absolutes. "The people rebuild," she said, glancing to the street below, where survivors carried stone, wood, and salvaged steel. Not from orders, not from fear, but because they choose to. There were no overseers, no banners directing labor, only hands working alongside other hands, slowly shaping shelter from ruin. A woman offered a bowl of water to a tired worker. A child shared a piece of scavenged bread with another. Humanity, unadorned, uncommanded, breathing on its own. Valian watched them quietly. A time long ago flickered in his memory, the first city he had helped raise. Before the empire had grown so vast, it no longer remembered the intimacy of small beginnings. He remembered the joy of that first unity, the laughter of people building something they believed in. He had tried to preserve that wonder by freezing time. He now understood that wonder could only live because it changed. Seraphine's gaze lingered on him, reading his silence. "You loved this place, not the throne, not the empire, the people." "Yes," Valian said, and the truth of it settled inside him, gentle and heavy. "I did." Arcturus lowered his eyes. "And I loved you," he said, not to wound, not for confession, but simply to state the truth that had shaped his life. "I followed you because I believed you were the one who could carry us through time. I believed eternity was safer with you than with death." Valian turned to face him, and for the first time in centuries, there was no distance between them. Only two men stripped of legend. "I was afraid," he admitted. "Afraid that if we died, everything we built would vanish. Afraid that meaning could be lost to time." Arcturus laughed once, softly, and the sound carried both grief and release. Meaning cannot be preserved by force. It only lives by being shared, remembered, passed on freely. Seraphine placed a hand on each of their shoulders, though this time there was no power in the gesture, only closeness. The empire has ended, but the lessons remain, and the galaxy is wide. There will be worlds that fall into chaos, and worlds that rise into grace. We are no longer responsible for shaping them. We are responsible only for choosing how we live among them. Valian felt the truth settle, not the heavy burden of duty, but the clear weight of being. He turned his gaze toward the gates of the city, where a new road had begun to form, not paved with starstone or imperial marble, but simply cleared earth, beaten flat by walking feet, a path outward, a path forward. "We cannot stay here," Valian said quietly. "Our presence will shape this place again, even without intention. The people must build without the shadow of who we were." Arcturus nodded, though his jaw tightened. "Then where do we go?" "Where all beginnings start," Seraphine said. "To the worlds that have forgotten us, to the places untouched by our history, not as rulers, not as legends, as wanderers." Her words carried no grand vision, only possibility. Valian stepped toward the city gates. He felt the earth shift beneath his feet, not with the solidity of immortality, but with the uncertainty of being alive. He welcomed it. Arcturus placed his sword upon the ground beside the broken monument, letting it rest there. Not discarded, but laid to peace. The sound of metal meeting stone echoed like the final chime of an age. Seraphine turned her face toward the rising sun. faint and pale though it was. "We do not need to know the path," she said, "only that we walk it together." They began to walk. No guards, no procession, no banners. Just 3 figures beneath the wounded sky, stepping beyond the ruins of their legacy. As they moved, the city behind them continued its quiet rebirth. And somewhere in the depths of the cosmos, stars long dimmed began to flicker, no longer as beacons of empire, but as the simple promise that life continues. What they had built had fallen. What they had protected had been freed, and for the first time in lifetimes, the horizon before them felt open. The wind carried a subtle chill across the remains of Orion, drifting through the fractured avenues and hollow towers like a ghost of the empire that once was. Dust and ash settled upon crumbling stone, yet there was movement beneath it. Small figures emerged from the shadows of destroyed homes and collapsed bridges, carrying tools, salvaged timber, and stones repurposed for shelter. Mortals rebuilding without command or expectation, guided only by instinct and the faint memory of hope that survived centuries of war. Valian observed from the highest terrace, his hands resting lightly on the warped railing, his gaze tracing the scattered life below. Immortality had left him for the first time feeling truly human, aware of fatigue, acutely conscious of the fragility of each breath. He exhaled slowly, letting the weight of centuries slide from his shoulders, though the emptiness it left was not absence, but space for possibility. Arcturus stood at his side, shoulders relaxed but posture still measured, as though muscle memory from centuries of command lingered even in this new mortality. "It is quiet," he said. His voice was soft, not from timidity, but from comprehension. Too quiet, perhaps. After all we've endured, I expected cries of despair, not this. He gestured toward the scattered workers, children, and families moving with deliberate care across broken streets. Resilience instead of ruin. "Yes," Valian murmured. "It is quiet because life persists without our interference. It is learning to breathe again, even after suffocation." His voice carried not resignation, but reflection. A man finally understanding that the empire he had tried to preserve through eternity was never his to hold. It had belonged to those who lived within it, who carried it forward in laughter, labor, and love. We cannot rebuild this world for them. We can only step aside and allow them to do what we fail to teach, to endure without fear of our shadow. Seraphine joined them then, moving along the terrace in measured steps, her robes brushing the fractured stone. "The empire is gone," she said softly, her gaze fixed on the horizon where burnt towers met pale sunlight. Not erased, but released. What remains are the lessons, the choices, the memories. The people will remember what they can, and let the rest fade naturally. And that is how balance returns. Valian nodded. He looked past the ruins, beyond the city, toward the faint glimmer of the outer planets still visible through the haze. For millennia, he had measured time by conquest, victories, and the sway of the Imperium across the stars. Now, time was measured in breaths, in the slow rebuilding of a single plaza, in the laughter of a child unburdened by his legacy. Immortality had promised power without consequence. Mortality demanded presence, vulnerability, and understanding of the cost of all actions. It was terrifying, but it was real. Arcturus's gaze shifted to the survivors below. "All those years," he murmured, "we believed our control preserved life. In truth, it often delayed the inevitability of change. We feared loss, but loss shapes people more than we ever could." Valian's eyes met his, and for the first time in centuries, there was no trace of rivalry, No echo of the battles that had consumed them across countless worlds. Only acknowledgement. "We sought permanence," Valian said, "and now we see that permanence is an illusion. Life does not wait. It adapts. It endures. It continues with or without our interference." The terrace fell silent then, save for the gentle murmur of wind through shattered spires. Seraphine's gaze remained distant, reflecting the ruined city below, and yet there was calm in her presence. She reached for the edge of the railing, running her fingers along the chipped stone as though grounding herself in the reality of the moment. "We were not rulers today," she said quietly, "nor will we ever be again. But we were witnesses. Witnesses to what survives when the weight of power is removed." Valian exhaled and turned his gaze skyward. The sun, pale and dying, illuminated the broken towers with muted gold. Light that had once gilded an empire now touched ruins, revealing beauty in imperfection, in resilience. He allowed himself a long, deliberate breath, feeling the fragile warmth of mortality settle across him. He could feel fatigue tug at muscles that had never truly known it, and he welcomed it. It was the proof that life, fragile and fleeting, mattered again. Arcturus followed his gaze. "Do you think they will remember us?" His voice was almost hesitant, a man unused to vulnerability. "Not as legends, not as gods, but as those who shaped history through flawed choices." Valian allowed a faint smile. "They will remember the impact of our choices, but more importantly, they will move forward. The galaxy will adapt without us defining it. That is the true legacy of life." Seraphine moved closer, placing her hands lightly on their shoulders, a gesture neither commanding nor restraining. "We do not need the galaxy's memory to validate our existence. The only measure left is what we choose to do with the time that remains, and we are finally free to choose." The sun descended further, casting long shadows across the city. Broken banners, fractured statues, toppled spires, all bore silent witness to centuries of ambition, of conquest, of love and loss. And in that silence, a new rhythm emerged. The rhythm of life unbound by duty, unshaped by fear, unburdened by eternity. Valian, Arcturus, and Seraphine stood together atop the highest terrace, watching the survivors below. Children ran past ruins, their laughter ringing across empty streets. Families carried what they could to rebuild their homes. Workers moved with quiet determination. Life persisted, unshaped by immortality, unencumbered by rulers, thriving in imperfection. Valian's voice broke the silence, soft but unwavering. "The Empire is gone, but life continues." Arcturus nodded, placing a hand on the shoulder of the man who had once been his brother in eternity. "And we continue with it." Seraphine's gaze lingered on the horizon, reflecting the faint glimmer of outer worlds beyond the city. "We step forward into what is left," she said, "not as rulers, not as immortals, but as those who remain to bear witness and to live." The wind carried their words across the city, over rubble and ruin, weaving into the quiet hum of rebuilding. The people did not hear them, not consciously, but they felt the presence of hope in the air, a reminder that the future was theirs to shape, free from the shadows of the past. Valian exhaled slowly, the weight of centuries falling away. He felt the strength of mortality returning, its fragility, its limitations, its profound beauty. It was a crown forged not from gold or steel, but from acceptance, responsibility, and the quiet knowledge that all things must end, and all things must begin anew. They remained atop the terrace as the sun finally dipped beneath the horizon, casting the city into a twilight of soft, reflective hues. Shadows stretched long and peaceful across broken streets, and the three of them, once immortal, once rulers of half a galaxy, stood in quiet understanding, their presence a testament to survival, adaptation, and the resilience of life itself. The Empire had fallen, but the galaxy breathed on. The dusk deepened into night, and Orion lay beneath a sky that no longer belonged to empire or immortality. The stars above were faint, as though still gathering the courage to shine again, after witnessing the collapse of ages. The quiet that settled over the city did not feel hollow. It felt like breath after grief, like the soft exhale of a world learning how to exist without being watched, commanded, or shaped by an immortal hand. Valian, Seraphine, and Arcturus descended slowly from the terrace, leaving behind the vantage that had once been the seat of their power. The stone steps were cracked and uneven, roots pushing between the fractures as nature reclaimed what once had been restrained. The air grew denser as they walked, filled with scents of earth, rust, and distant hearth smoke, the smell of lives continuing. As they reached the city streets, small clusters of survivors noticed them. There were no gasps of recognition, no kneeling, no reverence. These people did not see emperors, commanders, or legendary figures carved into history. They saw three travelers dressed in worn fabrics and ash-dusted cloaks, walking without entourage or authority. It was right that they were unrecognized. Power had always separated them. Now, anonymity offered them grace. A woman carrying beams of salvaged wood paused as they passed, brushing sweat from her brow. "You three," she said, her voice rough from labor. "If you've strength left in your bones, lend a hand. The wall won't stand itself." Valian blinked, caught briefly off guard. The command was not disrespectful. It was simply practical, born from necessity, not hierarchy. Arcturus stepped forward first, his voice steady. "Show us where you need us." The woman nodded and motioned them toward a partially collapsed building where others struggled to lift the central support beam. Arcturus moved to one side of it, placing both hands beneath the timber. He strained, truly strained, muscles trembling with the effort. The weight was immense. Once, he could have lifted such a beam without thought. Now, his breath shook through his chest, but the weight grounded him. It reminded him that strength meant something only when it cost something. Valian joined on the opposite side. His body, though newly mortal, remembered movement, balance, leverage. The two of them lifted together, the beam rising into place as others hurried to brace it with stone and binding rope. When it settled, the structure held, not perfectly, not forever, but enough. Seraphine moved among the workers, tending hands blistered from stone and rope, binding wounds with strips of cloth torn from her sleeves. Her fingers were gentle, her instructions soft. Those she helped did not ask where she learned to heal. They simply accepted her presence and continued with their work. No one asked who they were. No one had to. When the wall was secured and the workers dispersed to gather more materials, the three of them stood together in the half-ruined courtyard, breathing hard in the cool night air. Arcturus wiped dust from his brow, and for the first time in longer than memory could quantify, he smiled, not the sharp, triumphant smile of victory, nor the weary smile of resignation. It was a quiet, human smile. "It feels different," he murmured. "It feels real," Seraphine replied. Valian looked toward the horizon, where the faint glimmer of starlight touched the broken city. "We once shaped the galaxy through decree," he said, "and yet we never shaped anything as meaningful as this." Arcturus exhaled, long and slow. Then perhaps meaning was never found in the throne, only in the effort. They began walking again, moving away from the center of the city toward the long road that led beyond the gates. The moon rose behind them, pale and soft, casting the ruins in silver light. The night wind carried the rustling of leaves from new growth pushing through shattered stone. At the city's edge, they paused. The gates, once towering monuments inlaid with celestial metal, were now shattered fragments scattered across the ground. The road beyond stretched long and uneven, disappearing into the darkened plains, a path free of banners, legions, and legacy. Seraphine stepped forward first, her footsteps slow but certain. Valian followed, with Arcturus beside him, neither leading, neither following. Equals at last. The road stretched before them, unfamiliar and unclaimed. They did not speak for a long while. The only sound was wind sweeping across open earth. As they walked, Arcturus finally broke the silence. "Do you regret it?" His voice was not accusing. It was the voice of someone who could finally ask the question without fear of the answer. Valian considered for a long moment. "I regret the pain I caused, the choices made in fear, the weight I forced others to bear because I could not face loss." He stopped briefly, looking up toward the wide, star-filled sky. "But I do not regret loving this world enough to try." Arcturus nodded, the answer settling into him like a stone placed in its rightful place. Seraphine looked between them. Her voice was quiet, steady. "We must carry what we learned, not what we lost. The past is no longer ours to shape, only the future we walk toward now." Beyond the plains, faint outlines of distant settlements flickered like fireflies, small beacons of life scattered across the vastness. The galaxy was still vast, still wounded, still growing. They would not rule it. They would walk through it, together. As darkness settled fully, the stars came alive, bright, clear, shimmering. No longer banners of conquest, no longer symbols of legacy, just distant suns burning because they must. Valian stopped and looked up, and for the first time since eternity was taken from him, he felt awe. Not the awe of power, the awe of being small. Arcturus looked up too, his breath catching, not in fear, but in wonder. Seraphine's voice came soft, like the settling of night. "The star that forgets its name does not cease to shine. It simply shines without needing to be known." Valian closed his eyes, letting the meaning settle in the quiet space where immortality had once lived. They walked on. No destination, no prophecy, no empire, just the road, the stars, and the fragile, beautiful weight of being alive. And though history would someday forget their names, the world they left behind would remember what truly mattered. That even after the fall of empires, even after the death of eternity, life continues. And it is enough.